Paul the Apostle, a life transformed by Christ. Over 2 millennia ago, history witnessed 2 extraordinary births that would shape the future. One was Jesus, born through the miracle of the Virgin Mary, whose life, teachings, and resurrection would alter the course of human history. The other was Saul, born in Tarsus, a man destined to become one of the most influential figures in spreading the message of Jesus. Though Saul was not the Messiah, his life's mission would forever transform the world by sharing the story of salvation. Early life in Tarsus. Saul was born in Tarsus, a thriving city in modern-day Turkey that had been under Roman rule for 70 years. As a Roman citizen, Saul enjoyed privileges that many others lacked. While the exact source of his citizenship remains uncertain, it is believed that his family owned land before Rome's colonization of Tarsus. Roman citizenship granted not only legal benefits, but also the freedom to observe cultural and religious traditions. Tarsus was a hub of trade and knowledge, home to one of the ancient world's most prestigious universities, rivaling even Athens. Saul grew up in this vibrant environment, learning the tent-making trade from his father, a Pharisee. His early years were shaped by Jewish traditions, Roman privileges, and the opportunities provided by his bustling hometown. Training under Gamaliel. Around the age of 14, Saul's father arranged for him to study under Gamaliel, a renowned Pharisee and family friend. Gamaliel was one of the era's most brilliant legal minds, and being accepted as his student was an honor few could achieve. For 8 years, Saul immersed himself in the teachings of the Pharisees, a sect dedicated to interpreting Jewish law for the people. This rigorous education prepared him for leadership within Judaism. The Pharisees wielded significant influence, with 10 members chosen to serve on the Sanhedrin, Judaism's highest council. The Sanhedrin's rulings were binding on Jews everywhere, making it a powerful force in religious and legal matters. After completing his studies, Saul returned to Tarsus to serve in the local synagogue. Shortly after, he received life-changing news. Gamaliel had nominated him for the Sanhedrin. Filled with excitement, Saul left Tarsus for Jerusalem, ready to begin his new role. Encountering the way. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, Saul discovered a city transformed. A new Jewish sect devoted to a man from Nazareth, Jesus, had emerged, calling themselves the Way. These followers claimed that Jesus was God incarnate, the fulfillment of prophecies Saul knew intimately. Their existence challenged everything the Sanhedrin stood for, and Saul viewed them as dangerous blasphemers. Outraged, Saul launched a campaign to suppress this new movement. He interrogated followers of the Way, ordinary people like fishermen, questioning their authority and trying to dismantle their beliefs. Despite his efforts, the disciples remained steadfast, proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah. Saul and his colleagues issued strict warnings, forbidding them from spreading their message, but the disciples refused to comply. The stoning of Stephen. One day, a follower of Jesus named Stephen was arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin. When asked to renounce his faith, Stephen boldly declared Jesus as the Son of God. His unwavering defiance enraged Saul. In a symbolic act of disgust, Saul tore his cloak, followed by the rest of the council. This act signaled their decision to condemn Stephen. Stephen's execution marked a turning point for Saul. His rage against the Way intensified, and he became even more determined to eradicate the movement. Yet, unknown to Saul, this moment was also the beginning of his transformation. Saul's mission to destroy the Way. With the authority of the Sanhedrin, Saul began a fierce campaign against the followers of Jesus. He traveled from city to city, arresting believers and trying to silence their message. His zeal for the law and his hatred for the Way consumed him. Saul believed he was protecting the Jewish faith from heresy, but in reality, he was on a collision course with destiny. Saul's reputation as a persecutor grew, striking fear into the hearts of Christians. Yet, the movement continued to grow, spreading the message of Jesus far beyond Jerusalem. Despite his efforts, Saul could not extinguish the faith of those who believed in the risen Christ. A life-changing encounter. On the road to Damascus, everything changed. As Saul traveled to arrest more followers of the Way, a blinding light stopped him in his tracks. He heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" It was Jesus, revealing himself to the man who had sought to destroy his followers. This encounter left Saul blind and deeply shaken. For 3 days he neither ate nor drank, reflecting on what had happened. A believer named Ananias, guided by God, came to Saul, restoring his sight and baptizing him. From that moment, Saul's life took a radical turn. From Saul to Paul. Saul became Paul, dedicating his life to spreading the message of Jesus. The persecutor of Christians became their greatest advocate, traveling across the Roman Empire to preach the gospel. Paul's transformation stunned both his former allies and the early Christians, who initially doubted his sincerity. Yet his passion and commitment soon made him a central figure in the early church. Paul wrote letters to churches, offering guidance, encouragement, and theological insights. These letters, now part of the New Testament, continue to inspire believers worldwide. Paul's teachings emphasized salvation through faith, the grace of God, and the unity of all believers in Christ. Center. A legacy of faith. Paul's life was not without challenges. He faced imprisonment, beatings, and rejection, yet he remained steadfast in his mission. His writings and journeys laid the foundation for Christianity's expansion, making him one of the faith's most influential figures. Paul's legacy is a testament to the power of transformation. A man once driven by hatred became a messenger of love and redemption. His story reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. Conclusion. The story of Paul the Apostle is one of redemption, purpose, and unwavering faith. From his early days as a Pharisee to his encounter with Christ and his mission to spread the gospel, Paul's life reflects the transformative power of God's love. Through his writings and actions, Paul bridged cultural and spiritual divides, bringing the message of Jesus to the world. Paul's journey continues to inspire believers, showing that even the most unlikely individuals can be instruments of God's plan. His life reminds us that faith, once embraced, has the power to change not only individuals, but the course of history. Saul's transformation, from persecutor to proclaimer of Christ. Saul of Tarsus, a devoted Pharisee and fierce opponent of the early Christian movement, experienced a transformation that changed not only his life, but the course of human history. This is the story of how a man consumed by hatred for Jesus' followers became one of the most passionate advocates for the gospel. Stephen's martyrdom and Saul's zeal. The stoning of Stephen, a follower of Jesus, marked a turning point in Saul's life. As members of Jerusalem's council hurled stones at Stephen, Saul stood by, watching with approval. This act of violence struck fear into the early church, causing many believers to flee Jerusalem. Yet their fear was temporary, as they soon resumed proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah. The Sanhedrin, alarmed by the growing movement, debated ways to halt it. They eventually enacted a law banning participation in this radical faith, with severe penalties for violators. To enforce the law, they chose Saul, whose familiarity with the region and zeal for Jewish law made him the perfect candidate. When reports emerged that Jesus' followers were spreading their message in Damascus, Saul was tasked with silencing them. With determination, he embarked on a 3-day journey from Jerusalem to Damascus, a journey that would forever alter his destiny. How? A life-changing encounter on the road. As Saul traveled with companions, a sudden blinding light stopped him in his tracks. Struck blind, he heard a voice asking, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Bewildered, Saul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The voice replied, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Rise, go into the city, and you will be told what to do." His companions stood, speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul, now unable to see, was led by hand into Damascus. For 3 days, he remained blind, fasting as he grappled with the meaning of this divine encounter. Ananias and Saul's transformation. In Damascus, a believer named Ananias received instructions from God to visit Saul. Though hesitant, knowing Saul's reputation for persecuting Christians, Ananias obeyed. He prayed for Saul, and something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, restoring his sight. Saul was baptized, marking the beginning of his transformation. For the first time, Saul truly understood the nature of God and the message of Jesus. Saul spent days with the disciples in Damascus, gaining strength and learning from their fellowship. Over time, he began to preach in synagogues, boldly declaring Jesus as the Son of God. Those who heard him were astonished, asking, "Isn't this the man who caused havoc in Jerusalem among those who called on this name?" Despite their disbelief, Saul continued to grow in spirit and confound the Jews in Damascus with his compelling message. Ikon, escaping persecution. Saul's bold preaching soon drew hostility from those who opposed the Christian faith. The Jews in Damascus plotted to kill him, monitoring the city gates to prevent his escape. Aware of the danger, Saul's followers devised a plan. Under the cover of darkness, they lowered him in a basket through an opening in the city wall, allowing him to flee safely. This was the first of many attempts on Saul's life as a disciple of Jesus. It marked the beginning of a journey filled with trials, challenges, and unwavering dedication to spreading the gospel. Saul's return to Jerusalem. After 3 years, Saul returned to Jerusalem, eager to meet Peter and James, leaders of the early church. For 15 days, they engaged in deep discussions about the resurrection and the identity of Jesus. Saul's excitement was palpable as he connected with those who had walked with Jesus. However, his return was far from welcoming. The Sanhedrin, now aware of his conversion, viewed him as a traitor. Fearing retaliation, the apostles decided to send Saul back to Tarsus, his hometown. They believed he would be safer there, away from the hostility of Jerusalem. Saul departed, spending the next 3 years in Tarsus, reflecting on his mission and preparing for the work ahead. The church expands to the Gentiles. During Saul's time in Tarsus, Peter received a revelation that would expand the scope of the church. In a vision, Peter saw a sheet descending from heaven, filled with clean and unclean animals. Confused by the vision, Peter soon understood its meaning. God was extending salvation to the Gentiles, breaking traditional boundaries. This revelation prompted the apostles to send Barnabas, a trusted disciple, to Antioch. His mission was to nurture the growing Gentile church in the city, where the term Christian was first used to describe Jesus' followers. Recognizing the magnitude of the task, Barnabas sought out Saul in Tarsus to assist him. Saul's ministry begins. Barnabas brought Saul to Antioch, where they worked together to teach and encourage the believers. The church in Antioch thrived, becoming a hub for spreading the gospel to the Gentile world. Saul's knowledge, passion, and personal transformation made him a powerful advocate for the message of Jesus. Over time, Saul's ministry expanded beyond Antioch. He embarked on missionary journeys, traveling across the Roman Empire to share the gospel. His letters to churches, filled with wisdom and guidance, became foundational texts for Christian theology. Through his writings, Saul, now known as Paul, emphasized themes of grace, faith, and unity in Christ. A life of dedication. Paul's journey was not without hardships. He faced imprisonment, beatings, and rejection, yet his commitment to Christ never wavered. His transformation from a persecutor of Christians to one of their greatest champions is a testament to the power of God's grace. Paul's legacy is defined by his unwavering dedication to his mission. He bridged cultural divides, bringing the message of salvation to Jews and Gentiles alike. His life serves as a reminder that no one is beyond the reach of God's transformative power. Conclusion. The story of Saul's transformation into Paul is one of redemption, courage, and purpose. From his zealous persecution of Christians to his passionate proclamation of the gospel, Paul's life reflects the profound impact of encountering Jesus. His journey inspires believers to embrace faith, overcome challenges, and share the message of salvation with the world. Paul's legacy continues to resonate, reminding us that God can use anyone to fulfill his purpose. Through his story, we see the power of grace, the importance of obedience, and the enduring hope found in the gospel. Paul's missionary journeys, spreading the gospel to the Gentile world. Paul, once a zealous persecutor of Christians, became one of the most passionate ambassadors of Christ's message. Alongside Barnabas, Paul embarked on missions that transformed communities, spread Christianity far and wide, and established the foundation for the early church. These journeys revealed not only Paul's resilience, but also the power of the gospel to transcend cultural and geographic boundaries. Early growth in Antioch. Barnabas, a trusted leader in the Christian community, recognized the need for a capable companion to help nurture the emerging church in Antioch. He sought Saul, who would soon be known as Paul, to assist in guiding this growing group of believers. At the time, news of Jesus spread primarily through travelers who had visited Jerusalem, heard the gospel, and returned home. However, the Antioch church marked the first intentional effort to establish a community dedicated to Christ's teachings. After a year of ministry in Antioch, Saul and Barnabas felt called to take the message of Jesus to Gentile cities throughout the known world. They envisioned establishing local churches to build the global kingdom of God. Their mission began modestly, but laid the groundwork for the spread of Christianity to distant lands. First missionary journey, Cyprus and Asia Minor. With John Mark joining them, Paul and Barnabas set sail from Antioch to Cyprus. In this bustling island, a Roman proconsul, Sergius Paulus, embraced Christianity, a pivotal moment for the early church. Inspired by this breakthrough, Saul adopted the Hellenistic name Paul, symbolizing his mission to reach Gentile audiences. From Cyprus, the group journeyed to Perga in Pamphylia. However, faced with significant opposition, John Mark abandoned the mission and returned to Jerusalem. Undeterred, Paul and Barnabas pressed on, traveling to Antioch in Pisidia, where Paul delivered a powerful sermon in a synagogue. His message resonated with Gentiles, but provoked hostility from some Jews. Recognizing the resistance, Paul decided to focus his efforts on Gentiles, leaving the Jewish audience for the time being. In Iconium, Paul and Barnabas faced threats of stoning and fled to Lystra. There, a miraculous healing of a crippled man led the locals to mistake Paul and Barnabas for the Greek gods Hermes and Zeus. Despite their attempts to redirect this misguided worship, local Jewish leaders accused them of blasphemy. Paul was stoned and left for dead but survived. Seeking refuge in Derbe, Paul and Barnabas continued preaching before retracing their steps to encourage the newly established churches. The Jerusalem Council, a defining moment. Upon returning to Antioch, Paul and Barnabas encountered a new challenge. Some Jewish Christians insisted that Gentile converts must adhere to the law of Moses, including circumcision, to be true followers of Christ. This sparked intense debate, leading Paul and Barnabas to consult the apostles in Jerusalem. At the Jerusalem Council, presided over by James, the apostles passionately debated the role of Jewish law for Gentile believers. Ultimately, the council affirmed Paul's position. Salvation through Christ was not contingent upon adherence to Jewish customs. The cross of Christ fulfilled the law, freeing Gentiles from these requirements. This decision marked a turning point, emphasizing grace over legalism and opening the door for the gospel to reach a broader audience. Second missionary journey, westward expansion. Encouraged by the council's decision, Paul and Barnabas prepared for another missionary journey. However, a disagreement arose over John Mark's involvement. Barnabas wanted to include him, but Paul, recalling his earlier desertion, refused. Unable to reconcile their differences, Paul and Barnabas parted ways. Barnabas took John Mark, while Paul chose Silas and later Timothy to accompany him. Paul's second journey began with revisits to churches in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch of Pisidia. He intended to travel into Bithynia but was divinely redirected to Troas. One night in Troas, Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia calling for help. Interpreting this as a message from God, Paul and his companions, including Luke, set out for Macedonia. Tertii, reaching Europe, Philippi, and beyond. The group arrived in Philippi, a prominent city in northern Greece. Here, Paul and Silas faced their first imprisonment. Ancient prisons were harsh, often damp and filthy. Despite the suffering, Paul and Silas prayed and sang hymns, inspiring other prisoners. An earthquake shook the prison, freeing them from their chains. Instead of escaping, Paul used the moment to share the gospel with the jailer, who, moved by their faith, became a believer along with his household. So, continued ministry and opposition. From Philippi, Paul and his team traveled to Thessalonica, Berea, and Athens. Each city presented unique challenges. In Thessalonica, Paul faced opposition from those resistant to his teachings. In Berea, the Jews were more open, examining the scriptures to verify Paul's claims. Athens, steeped in philosophy and idolatry, offered an intellectual challenge. Paul delivered a memorable sermon at the Areopagus, emphasizing the one true God over the many idols worshipped by the Greeks. Paul's journey continued to Corinth, a major commercial hub where he stayed for 18 months, establishing a strong church. Here he worked as a tent maker, engaging with the local community while preaching. Despite opposition, Corinth became a center for spreading the gospel throughout the region. Conflict and growth in Antioch. After returning to Antioch, Paul faced ongoing debates over the inclusion of Gentiles in the Christian faith. The tension underscored the growing pains of a movement that sought to unite diverse cultures under one faith. Paul's unwavering commitment to grace and the gospel message inspired many, but it also made him a target of criticism and hostility. Legacy of the early missionary journeys. Paul's early journeys laid the foundation for Christianity's expansion across the Roman Empire. His ability to adapt to different cultures and his relentless dedication to spreading the gospel transformed communities and lives. The churches he established became strongholds of faith, nurturing believers and spreading the message of Christ to new regions. Through his journeys, Paul demonstrated the power of resilience and faith in the face of adversity. Whether confronting opposition, enduring imprisonment, or navigating disagreements within the church, Paul remained steadfast in his mission. His story serves as a reminder of the transformative power of the gospel and the importance of perseverance in pursuing God's calling. Conclusion. Paul's missionary journeys highlight the early church's efforts to spread the gospel to all people, regardless of culture or background. From his work in Antioch to his travels across Cyprus, Asia Minor, and Europe, Paul's commitment to sharing Christ's message created a lasting impact. His journeys were filled with challenges, yet his unwavering faith and dedication to grace over law inspired countless believers. Paul's legacy continues to influence Christianity, reminding believers of the importance of courage, adaptability, and reliance on God's guidance. His life exemplifies the transformative power of faith and the boundless reach of the gospel message. Paul's final journeys. A life of sacrifice and legacy. Paul's life, marked by relentless dedication to spreading the gospel, culminated in a series of journeys that forever shaped Christianity. Through hardships, miracles, and unwavering faith, Paul left a legacy that continues to resonate across the world. His final years, though fraught with challenges, were filled with profound contributions to the church, culminating in his martyrdom. Imprisonment and miracles in Philippi. Even in chains, Paul and Silas found strength in prayer and worship. As they praised God in prison, a miraculous event unfolded. The prison gates flew open, and the jailers, moved by the power of God, converted to Christianity. After this dramatic event, Paul departed Philippi and traveled to Thessalonica, where his teachings caused such upheaval that he was forced to flee under cover of night to Berea. From there, Paul set sail to Athens, a city he had long anticipated visiting. Sechinur. Brief stay in Athens and a long sojourn in Corinth. Paul's time in Athens was brief but impactful. On the Areopagus, he delivered a famous sermon about the unknown God, emphasizing the one true Creator. His message was met with ridicule from many, prompting a swift departure to Corinth. In Corinth, Paul stayed for a year and a half, strengthening the church and composing letters to the Thessalonian believers. From Corinth, Paul embarked on a sea journey, stopping at Cenchrea and Ephesus before returning to Jerusalem. Beginning the third missionary journey. By 53 AD, Paul was ready for another mission. At 47 years old, he had already outlived many of his peers. Setting out from Antioch, Paul revisited churches in Asia Minor, offering encouragement before heading westward. His first major stop was Ephesus, where he spent 3 years building the church and performing extraordinary miracles. During this time, Paul wrote letters to the Corinthians, urging them to support famine relief efforts for Jerusalem. From Ephesus, he dispatched missionaries to Colossae and Laodicea, extending the reach of the gospel. Tragedy in Troas and letters from Macedonia. Continuing his journey, Paul reached Troas, where a young boy fell from a window during one of Paul's late-night sermons. The boy's death seemed certain, but Paul raised him back to life, a testament to his faith and the power of God. From Troas, Paul traveled through Macedonia and Achaia, composing his letter to the Romans and addressing issues in the Galatian church. His journey ended in the port city of Miletus, where he summoned the Ephesian church leaders for an emotional farewell. Paul revealed his intention to return to Jerusalem, fully aware that this decision would likely lead to his arrest and death. Despite the council's warnings, Paul was resolute. Amid tears and prayers, the leaders accepted God's will, allowing Paul to embark on his final journey to Jerusalem. Arrest and imprisonment in Jerusalem. Arriving in Jerusalem, Paul faced the hostility he had anticipated. The Sanhedrin accused him of abandoning Jewish law and preaching against Moses' commandments. Though Paul denied the charges, his defense fell on deaf ears. He was arrested and transported to Caesarea, where he spent time in contemplation, resting after years of rigorous ministry. Journey to Rome. In 60 AD, under Festus's governance, Paul appealed to be sent to Rome. The journey was fraught with dangers, including shipwrecks, storms, and even a snakebite. Despite these trials, Paul finally arrived in Rome by 61 AD, where he was placed under house arrest. Far from idle, Paul used this time to write some of his most renowned letters, including those to the Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Philemon. A year of writing and ministry. Confined to his home, Paul continued his pastoral work, answering questions, resolving theological disputes, and encouraging the early church. His writings from this period remain foundational to Christian theology, addressing themes of grace, unity, and the supremacy of Christ. After a year, Paul was released and resumed his missionary work, traveling through Macedonia and Asia Minor to visit and strengthen the churches he had established. The rise of Nero and renewed persecution. In 62 AD, Nero ascended to power, ushering in a period of intense persecution for Christians. Nero's cruelty knew no bounds. He burned Christians alive and blamed them for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. This marked a turning point for the early church, as Nero's actions inspired fear and hostility toward the growing Christian movement. Many scholars view Nero as a prototype of the beast described in Revelation, a figure of ultimate opposition to God. 1. Theory. Final arrest and martyrdom. As persecution escalated, Paul was arrested once more. During this imprisonment, he wrote his final letter, 2 Timothy, a powerful testament to his faith and dedication to Christ. Shortly afterward, Paul was executed by beheading, likely between 64 and 68 AD, under Nero's orders. His death marked the end of a life wholly devoted to spreading the gospel. Legacy of Paul's life and ministry. Paul's life exemplifies resilience, faith, and a commitment to God's calling. From his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus to his missionary journeys and final imprisonment, Paul's story is one of transformation and purpose. He bridged cultural divides, bringing the message of Jesus to Gentiles and Jews alike. Paul's writings, filled with wisdom and encouragement, continue to shape Christian thought and practice. His letters address timeless themes: grace, redemption, perseverance, that resonate across generations. Through his ministry, Paul established a foundation for the global church, demonstrating that faith in Christ transcends boundaries of culture, language, and geography. Lessons from Paul's life. Paul's story teaches us that obedience to God's call often comes with challenges. He faced rejection, physical hardship, and even death, yet his faith never wavered. His unwavering trust in God's plan, even in the face of persecution, inspires believers to remain steadfast in their own journeys. Paul also shows the importance of adaptability in ministry. Whether preaching to philosophers in Athens, addressing congregations in Corinth, or writing letters from prison, Paul tailored his message to reach diverse audiences without compromising the truth of the gospel. Conclusion: a legacy that endures. Paul's life and ministry left an indelible mark on Christianity. His dedication to spreading the gospel, even at great personal cost, serves as a model for believers today. Through his letters and actions, Paul demonstrated the transformative power of God's grace and the importance of living a life centered on Christ. Though Paul's earthly journey ended in martyrdom, his legacy endures. His writings continue to inspire, his teachings guide the church, and his example encourages believers to embrace their calling with courage and conviction. Paul's story reminds us that faith, when fully embraced, has the power to change lives and shape history.